The Brussels Report podcast.
Welcome to the new episode of the Brussels Report podcast. My name is Pieter Cleppe. I'm the editor-in-chief of Brussels Report, and I'm delighted to have as my guest today Zoltan Kesz. He is a former member of parliament from Hungary, and at the moment he's the director of operations of the Civitas Institute, as well as the honorary president of the Free Market Foundation in Hungary. So he's a real fighter for liberty in Hungary, and I'm really delighted to have him with me here in this podcast because, of course, Hungary is on the forefront of, let's say, the debate within the European Union on the rule of law and sort of how to deal with member states that are perceived to be, let's say, backsliding in terms of the rule of law. And perhaps in the case of Hungary, you could also say backsliding in terms of economic reform, the country that did a lot of good after communism collapsed. Zoltan, welcome.
Well, thank you, Peter, and I'm really honored to be here on your show.
Great to have you. So maybe first, to continue a little bit the introduction, maybe you should explain how you became an MP and how you basically grabbed the supermajority of Viktor Orbán, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, that was 6 years ago, unfortunately, a long time ago, and that was a by-election for one seat in my constituency. And I decided to run as an independent, and I was supported by 6 parties, and I managed to defeat the pro-government or the governing party's candidate, which at the time meant that they didn't have a 2/3 majority anymore for 3 years only, because after that in 2018, they won again with a 2/3 majority. And we are looking at next year's election. One of the things that is in focus, whether they will have another 2/3 majority next year or not.
Okay, interesting. Well, it's still quite a great accomplishment because, I mean, in politics, it's hard to make a difference as just a member of parliament. So you were even, let's say, yeah, as you say, an independent. So I think that's quite impressive and really shows how, how well grounded you are in Hungarian politics. So, I mean, tell us a little bit about let's say, the rule of law situation. Let's start with that. Is it really as bad as some media outside of Hungary depict, or is it much worse? What's your view on that?
When we come to the rule of law, I think we could go on for hours talking about not necessarily the rule of law, but the lack of it. And there are certain issues in Hungary that are, in my opinion, under threat in a way, as far as the present government is handling the situations. For example, we can mention the freedom of the press. I think in the European Union, we see a huge media concentration in the hands of one party or one government, and that is in Hungary. I don't see any other examples in the European Union. Mm-hmm. However, now Poland is coming up, unfortunately. In Hungary, what we see now is that the majority of the country only has access to media that is controlled by the government. Mm-hmm. It's true, especially for the countryside. And when we come to the electorate itself, we see that the countryside is basically the voter base of Fidesz, of the governing party. And we see that the countryside only gets the information from the national television, from national radio, from government-friendly oligarchs that are owning the county newspapers. So the propaganda reaches the countryside pretty badly, or well, if you look at it from the government's point of view. So I think that's a very that's a situation that's worth looking at when we come to the rule of law. Another important issue regarding the rule of law is the judiciary. Sorry, Hungary. In Hungary, we see the court, the Supreme Court, which has been packed, or actually the Constitutional Court, which has been packed by pro-Fidesz judges. Also now, The higher courts have been packed with pro-government friends, let's say. So we see a huge discrepancy between real rule of law and what is practiced in the courts. So that's another issue. Checks and balances. There is no checks and balances in Hungary. I mean, we see that this is basically, I mean, the last 12 years, 11 years have been like a law machinery that was practiced by Fidesz. So anything that comes out of their mind becomes a law. There is no check, no balance. When I was in parliament for 3 years, I would say that yes, they had no 2/3 majority, but basically they could pass whatever law they wanted, and they never ever listened to the opposition. I mean, it was like a fight, like in Don Quixote, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
So there are lots of problems with the rule of law. I just mentioned these, but we can go on talking about like education, how the government forced the Central European University out of Budapest, or violated the freedom of academic institutions. So the list is basically endless, I should say.
Well, actually, I have, let's say, 3 points. First of all, I want to have your opinion on this visit of Viktor Orbán. It looked like a little propaganda video where he visited the newspaper stand and asked the newspaper guy, "Hey, can you show me all these newspapers here?" And then actually, like, can you confirm that in these newspapers are actually very critical of me? So he's trying to use that to counter your argument. But are these perhaps then national newspapers, or newspapers that are not read by the, let's say, the countryside, or
I think what Viktor Orbán did was a good stunt, but it had no reality. I mean,
sure.
He did that in Budapest. I mean, yes, in Budapest there is a huge diversity of what people can read. Go to a village where you don't even have a newsstand.
Interesting.
Go to a village where the government has just decided that the post service, the National Post Service, will not distribute daily newspapers. So this was a stunt, but nothing more.
Okay.
Propaganda.
And then to maybe perhaps there's some optimism possible, because as I understand it, the mayor of Budapest, I think he's with the opposition, correct?
Yeah.
And isn't at the moment, don't you have like a very, let's say, wild coalition, correct me if I'm wrong, with even Jobbik, the far right, included, against
well, first
Orbán?
of all, I wouldn't say that Jobbik is the far right anymore. I would say
sure,
Fidesz is the far right.
Fair enough.
Fidesz is definitely the far right. I mean, what we've seen in the past years, Jobbik has come to the center right rather, and got rid of the elements who were like far right people. However, Fidesz has shifted way to the far right. So when we talk about this coalition between all the parties that are in opposition, yes, I think this is a coalition that needed to be done in order to defeat Fidesz next year, because how the election law is set up and how the gerrymandering actually set up the constituencies requires that there should be only one candidate against the Fidesz candidate. If there are 6 candidates against the Fidesz candidate, there is no chance. I already said that in 2018 with a couple of people, but the parties did not grow up to the task. The people already knew the answers, but the parties didn't. Now the parties all know the answer, but and they are trying to cooperate with each other. So I think this is a very important improvement once we look at the political landscape of Hungary, because never before had we seen a very close cooperation between Jobbik and the leftist parties. So I think this is a historic moment in a way, and I know that Fidesz will use the far right card against Jobbik, especially internationally. But I really want to warn that it is the far right that is claiming another party being the far right. So it's basically the old Bolshevik tactic that Fidesz is using, blaming your opponents of what you are or what you do.
Okay, and perhaps if we go to the topic of let's say the Chinese university, so China was going to invest even, I think it was 1 billion, it was like an enormous amount into a university in Budapest, right?
Exactly.
Just when the Central European University was sort of bullied out of Hungary, if I'm not wrong. I guess you would agree with that sentiment, and what I've understood from it, it looked like bullying. So I mean, isn't that a victory? Isn't that sort of like a sign of hope?
Well, basically, we see now that there are two major.
Sorry,
Chinese...
I should explain.
Yeah,
as I understand, this project has failed. That the Chinese university will not be residing there, right?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, we're not sure yet.
Okay.
So,
okay.
There was a demonstration. Sure, we know already that the majority of the Hungarian population is very much against the Fudan University campus in Budapest. Mainly, not only because of what you mentioned, the Chinese money, but the Chinese loan that is $1.5 billion, if I'm not mistaken,
yes.
And it should be covered by Hungarian taxpayers,
wow.
Which is definitely not very attractive. And
no.
see that around 2/3 of Hungarians don't support this university. And there were demonstrations, and Fidesz finally took this topic off the agenda. However, we don't know what's going to happen if, for some reason, they win next year, and maybe this will come back to the table. But the other interesting story, another interesting Chinese cooperation, let's put it this way, is the Belgrade-Budapest railway line, which is, I would say, a gateway for China to enter the European Union. Again, huge amount of money and no transparency at all. So and also during the pandemic, we have seen how the Hungarian government has received a lot of support from China to propagate their machines, the vaccines, the ventilating machinery, and all that. And to what extent the Hungarian government has been involved in the business with China, again, costing billions to the Hungarian taxpayers.
That's, I think, an interesting topic because, I mean, as a free trader, generally, I would say, great, more infrastructure, more cooperation, more trade. But of course, these joint projects with China and Russia, I mean, in my view, are not not really free trade or free enterprise ventures. I mean, typically the Kremlin is behind it, or with some,
or the Chinese government is behind it,
or the CCP is behind it. And
exactly. So there is no free trade. I mean, real free trade between these countries. And also, this is the same thing we see, that there's also always an intermediary between the seller and the buyer, usually an oligarch, usually a friend of the government, increasing the price to skyrocket to, I don't know, billions. So there is no free trade. It has nothing to do with it. Although the Orbán government is trying to depict itself, especially internationally, that it's a pro-capitalist, pro-free trade government. No way.
I find the element that you say that there's a big loan, I find that actually more interesting than just the mere fact of a Chinese university. Yeah, some Chinese propaganda university, that's one thing. But then the fact that Hungarian taxpayers, like you say, would be dependent on the CCP, on China. What we've seen in Montenegro, what we've seen in places in Africa, where China gives a loan and then tries to use this for political leverage. I mean, Is
Oh yeah,
that too
definitely,
much of a worry in
definitely.
Hungary, or is that
Oh yeah,
actually?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to mention the example of the Montenegro story,
Mm,
because we see the same fear among the population that obviously we don't want to be indebted to the Chinese government, and interestingly, the amount of money that we talked about, the 1.5, 1.8 billion US dollars, is more than the Orbán government spent on its entire higher education system
well,
last year.
that's quite something. So then, let's discuss the topic. I mean, what can the European Union do about it? The European Union, meaning the EU institutions in Brussels, but also other governments in Europe that are, of course, typically wary to diplomatically intervene into domestic affairs of member states. I mean, rightly so, but then what I've always maintained also on Brussels report is that the least the EU can do about it is to no longer send checks to Orbán and people around him. Apparently, his son-in-law, according to one Hungarian.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's your view on that?
Well, I partly agree with you. I would say that in the past decade, the European Union has been very generous with Orbán as far as money is concerned. So the Orbán government is very grateful to the taxpayers of Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, and all the other EU countries, because it has made them enormously rich. But what you're saying is, basically ending all the money flow into Hungary. I would say that no, the procedures should be changed, and the money should go directly to, for example, cities, municipalities, villages, without the intervention of the Hungarian government. See that the biggest problem that we're facing as far as the EU funds are concerned is that the whole distribution system of this money depends on the government or government agencies. Once they are taken out of the big picture, I think Hungary can really benefit from EU funds. Without that happening, it will always benefit the ruling party, whoever it is or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's of course a big condition. If it would be able to do that, I would definitely think that's an improvement. I'm always in favor of decentralization, but yeah, of course, the thing is that these, all this cash comes from the EU budget, and at the end of the day, every member state has a veto over that. So I think it's hard to pull off. And personally, I'm also skeptical of all these mechanisms to try to punish Hungary, basically the Article 7 procedure and whatnot, because at the end of the day, what you see is that member states are very wary to condemn each other as corrupt or undermining the rule of law or whatnot. I mean, rightly so, because it's easy to come up with the accusation of double standards. If you go after Hungary, why not Poland or why not Spain? I mean, there's some issues in Spain, some officials that now are Catalan officials, people that were basically working in the bureaucracy, that are now liable for huge amount of money for allegedly having cooperated with that mock referendum. So there's some very serious problems in I mean, my own country, Belgium. You can also come up with problems in the justice system. So it's easy to employ the double standards. So personally, I'm more in favor of just basically cutting all the money. But I see your argument that obviously, in theory, these are great sums of money that could do a lot of good, but I think it's hard to get it right through the EU system and the government system.
Yeah, definitely. I have to agree with you on that point. Yes, but you have to make a precedent out of the misuse of public funds as well. There have been no precedents made out of the mishandling of the EU funds.
At least it's in the media now, and they're deciding this rule of law mechanism that the Commission is wary to use and everything, but still, sunlight is the best disinfectant. So I think it's very important to at least communicate how all that scarce taxpayers' money is helping to prop up cronyism, not just in Hungary, but also in other countries. And to at least raise the alarm that we have a problem here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Now, so yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, let's maybe go to the last topic I want to discuss with you. Also because you're an economist and the honorary chairman of the Free Market Foundation.
Which doesn't mean that I'm an economist, actually.
Oh, sorry. I thought, well, for me, everybody who's in favor of free markets can be described as somebody who supports economic thinking.
A fan of classical liberal economics and all that.
It's not as hard to be an economist as long as you think that if you agree with the fact that everything has a cost and there's no such thing as a free lunch. I would say if you agree with that, you're an economist.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so Hungary, as I understand it, after the fall of communism, is one of the, let's say, the great examples. I mean, not everything was right, but a lot of things happened in a relatively good way in the 90s. And then somehow it seems to have stopped. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like Hungary entered the middle income trap. And now we have all these cronyism as well in the last 10, 15 years. Basically, maybe this is connected with brain drain, I'm not sure. But then on the other hand, we see that Orbán and Hungary has now the lowest corporate tax rate in the EU, 9%. So what's your view on that? Did he do some good, Orbán, in terms of economic reform, or
you mentioned
really?
I mean, I'm in favor of the low corporate tax. I have to tell you that,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm in favor of low taxes, definitely. But when we talk about the low corporate tax or the low income tax, we have to mention that we have the highest value-added tax in the whole European Union with 27%.
Okay. Oh wow!
I think that tells you a lot. Yes, that is massive. Also, I'm in favor of flat tax, which we have in Hungary, which the Orbán government introduced, and many politicians in opposition would not favor. However, this flat tax is not a real flat tax because there are other taxes and other amounts of money that you have to pay at the end of the day. So this flat tax is not the real flat tax. Another thing related to the Hungarian economy of the past decade is the fact that, you can show yourself as a successful economy once you do it on other taxpayers' expense, that is on other European Union taxpayers' expense. I mean, as I mentioned some 10 minutes ago, Hungary has received a huge amount of money from the European Union. A lot of people say that, yeah, anybody can be successful from that amount of money and can build a well-functioning economy. However, this economy is not well-functioning. What we see now is, as you mentioned, the brain drain. We have a lot of sectors in the country where we see a huge labor shortage, medical workers, doctors, nurses. We see hospitals being partially closed down because doctors are leaving the country, or leaving the state medical system. So and also we see not only the medical sector, but the IT sector. We see also blue-collared workers leaving for Austria and Germany and the United Kingdom. In the past decade, we have experienced around 700,000 people leaving the country out of a population of 10 million. So that is massive. And when we come to labor shortage, and when we come to face the fact that in Hungary we don't have basic services now, or almost, we have to counter an argument made by the government whether refugees or people from other countries are needed to fill the vacuum of those missing. That's going to be an interesting challenge for the present government, because they have created this huge xenophobia in the country. And now we see that everybody would be happy to see somebody working on their house, somebody treating their children in a hospital, or being teachers in a school, because we just don't have them.
Interesting. So exactly, brain drain as a great impediment and of economic development. Is there anything else you to conclude, Zoltan, that you would say, especially let's say to an European Union policy listening public, if you would have to give like one priority to, let's say, EU policymakers when dealing with Hungary, what would it be?
Well, what would be the priority? I mean, don't let yourself fooled by Orbán. I mean, he has fooled the European Union so many times. He has, for example, right now the LGBTQ law. Everybody's talking about that. He knows that it's not going to stand in the European courts. He knows that in a year or two he has to withdraw, or Hungary has to withdraw or repeal this law. Still, this is at the top of the agenda, which makes him strong here in Hungary, because he's now again fighting with Brussels, and he will stand back when it comes to the decision in a year or two. But this is just a repetition again. Things that he's doing, like the CEU story. I mean, he never withdrew or repealed the law. However, when it came to the decision of the court, the CEU had already left.
Which story was that? Sorry,
the CEU, the Central European University.
Oh, of course, yeah, sure, yeah.
So yeah, he's playing a game. And it's not the politics that people in the European Union are used to, unfortunately. And he's using most of the topics that he's using internationally, not because of the international audience, because he wants to sell himself in Hungary domestically. So he wants to score points here in Hungary. He doesn't care about the international connotation and all the circumstances.
Well, that's interesting you say that, because indeed I was under the impression that they had actually left Hungary. So can serve as proof how effective this is.
Yeah.
Well, good. So thank you very much, Zoltan Kesz, for this, I think, very informative conversation.
Thank you, Peter, for having me.
I wish you all the best with the fight for liberty in Hungary, and I'm sure that great successes are still awaiting you.
Well, thank you, and I hope that the successes will come to the opposition next year for the election. I'm really hoping that there is a change coming soon.
Good stuff. Let's hope that.
All right. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much.
The Brussels Report podcast.